A huge new study published in the Lancet journal shows that the Mediterranean diet was superior in preventing major cardiovascular events. So we'll go through the existing diet research, how to rank that research, what this new paper adds, and then reveal what the best longevity diet is. Timestamps are in the pinned comment. Let's get into it. Before we get too bogged down in detail, we need to go through why there's so many different opinions about which diet is best. We've got the keto and other low-carb diets, paleo, vegan diets. And what tends to happen is that if someone tries a diet and it works for them, they swear by that diet and actively try and defend it. I see this all of the time in the YouTube comment section, and it adds to the noise. But the reason why we've got so many conflicting ideas and opinions is that the underlying research is very conflicting, and unless you know how to rank and interpret the studies, which we'll go through in the next section, the diet research can be very confusing. So I want to start by saying if you've found a diet that works for you, that's fantastic and I'm so happy for you. Just be aware that because that diet works for you, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for everyone. And a classic example of this is the keto and low carb movement. Keto is the most popular diet at the moment, where most, if not all carbs are evil. They drive up insulin, blood sugar levels, and lead to weight gain and diabetes. And this is known as the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. The trouble is that if this hypothesis worked in humans, the data would overwhelmingly support it and there would be no debate. But in reality, it doesn't, which is a nice segue in how to judge the different studies. There's different types of evidence and a ranking to that evidence, so it's called the evidence pyramid. Right at the bottom of the evidence pyramid, so the least convincing data that we've got, is from mice studies. These studies are interesting because we can tightly control the diets that the mice are on, and we can get a clear picture as to how it's affecting their health over their lifetime. But at the end of the day, it's still mice data in a lab, so we can't really always apply it to humans. So the next level of evidence is individual experience, as in if you have tried a diet and it works for you, then you might think that that diet works for everyone and recommend it to other people. This is sometimes called bro science. The next is observational data. So we might identify a group of people that have got really long lives and low levels of heart disease, and we can look at them and say, what are they doing differently? We can observe their habits and their diets. So we're not changing anything, we're simply observing them to see, is there something here that warrants further investigation? Next is randomized controlled trials. So we may have identified something from the mice data or the observational data that we actually want to trial. So what we do is take a group of people and we say for one half of them, they will be on one particular diet. The other half will be on a different diet. That way we can directly compare the diets to see which one is best. This is a randomized controlled study. After that, we've got systematic reviews and meta-analyses. This is where they combine all of the available data from the randomized controlled trials and see what they show. Because just because one randomized controlled trial may show a benefit, ideally we want that to be reproducible. So if we repeat that study in a different group, hopefully we would be seeing the same results. And that's what a meta-analysis can do. It combines all of the available data and hopefully it will show a benefit for one particular diet against another. And the very best organization that does these reviews is called Cochrane. So that's how to judge the different studies. So we've got the mice data, which is superseded by the individual human data, which itself is superseded by the observational data. Then we've got the randomized controlled trials, and right at the top, we've got the systematic reviews. With that out the way, we can now turn our attention to the diet data. And when trying to figure out what is the best longevity diet, primarily I want to know, what will that diet do to my cardiovascular disease risk? Will that diet either increase my heart disease risk or will it decrease my heart disease risk? Let's then jump straight to the very best available evidence that we've got. So I typed cardiovascular prevention into the Cochrane database and I looked at any analysis that involved diet. So we'll start by having a look at the things that don't have much evidence to support their recommendations. In 2015, an analysis was done looking at eating nuts to prevent heart disease, and that analysis found a lack of evidence for the effects of nut consumption on reducing cardiovascular disease, and very limited evidence for the effects on risk factors. So this is things like cholesterol levels and blood sugar levels. It's the same for whole grains, vegan diets, low glycemic index diets, and even intermittent fasting. And here is a point that may upset some people. Again, this is not my opinion, I'm simply reporting on the data. An analysis this year, 2022, looked at low carbohydrate diets versus versus balanced carbohydrate diets. And overall, there's probably little to no difference in weight reduction and changes to cardiovascular risk factors for up to 2 years follow-up when comparing both of these strategies. This included both overweight patients, obese patients, and patients with and without type 2 diabetes. Remember, these analyses are including randomized controlled studies and they're combining them together. And if I can summarize what we've gone through so far, there's insufficient evidence to recommend increasing nut consumption, whole grains, vegan diets, intermittent fasting, and low-carb diets. And I am going to pepper these reminders in this video. None of this is my opinion. I'm simply reporting on the best available data that we've got. What about the strategies that we can recommend? A Cochrane review this year found that low levels of sugar intake led to a small reduction in blood pressure and cholesterol levels. In 2016, it was found that increased fiber intake could reduce total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol levels. In 2013, the available evidence suggests that increasing fruit and vegetables does have favorable effects on cardiovascular risk factors, but more trials were needed to confirm this. In 2020, a review found that cutting down on saturated fat led to a 17% reduction in the risk of heart disease, and this was based off a large body of evidence. In 2018, we've got evidence that increasing polyunsaturated fatty acids probably slightly reduces our risk of heart disease events. And in 2020, there was evidence to suggest that increasing omega-3 intake slightly reduces the risk of heart disease. So let's summarize what we can recommend. We can recommend low sugar intakes, high fiber, increased fruit and vegetables. We want to reduce saturated fat, but we probably want to keep polyunsaturated fats and omega-3 fats. Sorry to emphasize this again, none of this is my opinion. I'm just reporting on the best available data. Now, those recommendations, they do sound awfully like the Mediterranean diet, but again, we've got a problem. There's a lack of evidence to support the Mediterranean diet. So let's start by defining the Mediterranean diet. It consists of a high intake of plant foods, cereals and whole grain breads, beans, nuts and seeds, unprocessed foods, olive oil as the main cooking ingredient and source of fat, low to moderate amounts of cheese and yogurt, low quantities of red meat, and higher quantities of fish. The trouble is though, in 2019, a Cochrane review, after combining 30 separate randomized controlled studies, said that despite the relatively large number of studies included in this review, there is still uncertainty regarding the effects of a Mediterranean-style diet on cardiovascular risk factors. Which brings us on to the new study that was published in the Lancet journal. As of right now, the clinical guidelines suggest that to lower our cardiovascular risk, we want to lower fat intake. So this study compared a low-fat diet to the Mediterranean diet. This was a randomized controlled study and the participants were followed up for 7 years. The Mediterranean diet had 35% of their calories as fat, 15% as protein, and 50% as carbohydrates, whereas the low-fat diet had less than 30% of fat, 15% protein, and a minimum of 55% carbohydrates. And the main differences between the diets were the amount of olive oil, grains, legumes, nuts, fish, and red meat. The study included 1,002 people, and during the study, the Mediterranean diet group had significantly increased their intake of total fat. And after 7 years, there was a roughly 25% reduction in the risk of heart disease events with the Mediterranean diet compared to the low-fat diet. And even after adjustment and sensitivity analyses, this was still strong and it confirmed that the Mediterranean diet was superior to the low-fat diet. So this is a fantastic study. It's large and it's over a long time frame. What we can see is a roughly 25% reduction in the risk of heart disease events when on the Mediterranean diet compared to a low-fat diet. This is a really important study and it will probably change the clinical guidelines that I use in my practice. The final thing that I want to go through is around salt intake. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year found that the rates of stroke, major cardiovascular events, and death from any cause were lower when patients used a salt substitute compared to regular salt. To try and sum things up then, The best available evidence that we've got right now suggests that the best longevity diet is the Mediterranean diet that's low in salt. And for the final time, this is not my opinion, this is just reporting on the best available data. If you have found a diet that works for you, that is fantastic. I don't think you should change anything if you've found a winning strategy. As for me, I have been primarily eating a Mediterranean diet for a long time now, and I'm going to continue with it based on this available data. So please let me know in the comments section, what did you think about all of the available evidence that we've gone through so far, and what are you going to do with your own diet? A massive thank you to all of the patrons who support the channel, and if you haven't already, please check out my clinical trial fundraiser for rapamycin. Until next time, thanks very much.